We're going to show you a complete guide on how to render a wall. I'm going to show you a modern way to do it using easier methods, then we're not going to make the job too hard or complicated. Now the first thing I want to mention is the materials I'm going to use. Now this render I'm going to explain here is called OCR. It's from a company called Weber, and it's a pre-mixed bag product. So all you need to do is add water to it, no plasticizers, no additives, everything is simple. And the product is so much easier to use. Now standard sand cement to me is a product that's outdated, hard to use, and it often leads to problems like cracking, shrinkage, and it's very hard to apply. So where with standard sand cement you have to know the mixes, lime, what plasticizer. With this there's no confusion, just mix up the render in the bucket and away you go. Now that is the first thing I recommend. Okay, now there's something we need to do before we even start rendering. It's preparing the walls ready for it. The first thing, whatever you're working on, when you give a big walls a big spray down, and this allows moisture to sit on the surface. You never want to render on a truly dry wall. Now I'm using this big mixing tub from Raffina, it's 90 litres, but it really doesn't matter what you use, as long as you've got something that can hold a decent amount of material. Now, this takes about 7 bags. Which is more than enough for this wall, but just be aware that you are going to use a lot of material when rendering. And the other great thing about OCR is not always easy to mix, easy to use, but you can even stick your beads with it. It's just a really sticky material that takes a lot of the hardship out of rendering. Say sand cement, it just generally isn't very sticky and it doesn't like to be played with. Now this, it's that good you can stick your beads on. So you can use pins, which I do recommend, but as I was fitting a stop bead just above the DPC line there, it is good just to use this material as it is. Now when we're applying the render, we want to use a tight coat at first. So what we're going to do is, whilst the wall is still damp, we're just applying the render directly to the blockwork. For blockwork, brickwork, you don't really need a primer. You can just hose the wall down. So we'll talk about that in the future, but generally what you want to do when you're applying the render is a lot of pressure behind the trowel, and that's going to force you to push the render into the wall. But again, elaborating back on the OCR, it's a very sticky product, and it does like to bind to the material, whatever material you put against it. So it's not as crucial to make the pressure a key thing here, but it's good practice, say if you ever do use sand cement, to make sure that pressure is key, because that's what's going to push the render into the blockwork. That's what's going to give you a strong hold, and that's what's going to make sure that the render sticks and makes it a strong bond to the blockwork, brickwork, whatever you're deciding to work onto. So yeah, in terms of if you are a beginner, and again if you are just learning rendering, OCR for me is a must material, and even though it's a bit more expensive, it's definitely worth doing. Now the other thing is I always rule my scratch coats. We're going to go into ruling specifically later on in this video, but I always like to make sure that my scratch coat is nicely ruled and flat, and this will make sure that the later processes of finishing is a lot easier because you've got an even background to work on. What you don't want is uneven scratch coat where your top coat's drying at different points. That'll just make your life very, very hard. And then once the render's taken up or firmed up a little bit, you just want to apply a scratch. This is why it's called scratch coat, because we apply a scratch to the coat of render we've applied, and I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, so we applied the scratch coat, and the reason you want to apply the scratch coat is so the top coat's got a key. That means when you apply the top coat, it's got the grooves to sit in, it's going to stick to the existing render, and it's going to get a nice grip. If you don't provide that key, you're going to have nothing but trouble, and the render will slide back. Now you've got two options with this OCR render. You can apply and top coat it the same day. So we've applied the scratch coat, it's been about an hour, it's dried up nicely, it's firmed up, which means we can apply the second coat on the same day. So if you've got a small patch to work with, it's probably the best option. You've got the ability to do it 2 coats in one day. Now the other option is apply a scratch coat, wait a day, and then come back. All you'd have to do is just hose the walls down beforehand. Now I've got mixed up, ready to go. I'm working right to left. So all I want to do is same as before, applying a nice generous portion to the wall. Now we want quite a thick mix here, because what we're going to do after this, we're going to rule it flat.
Hey mate.
Hello pal. How you doing?
Easter time.
I'm just filming, mate.
How are you?
Yeah. You're like, alright, mate. Is he in the camera?
When the customer ruins your video.
Yeah. I've got to get back in character. Quite handy you've got a thick mix because it allows you to build up the layers. Now what we're aiming for is overall thickness of 15mm. So if you are applying corner beads, make sure you get the plastic 15mm render beads. That's your best thickness. That gives you 2 coats of around 7mm. So we're applying the coats, and the big secret is lots of pressure. So we want lots of pressure when you're pushing in. You really want to push the render into the wall, into the existing scratch coat you've created. Give it a nice firm base to work on, and then you just want to trowel it on. We're not worried about the ridges, we're not worried about getting it flat. We've got the derby, that's the straight edges job to do that. So don't be playing with the render, you just want to apply it. Again, get your thickness, build it up. So then we've got a nice panel. What we want to do is work one panel at a time. So we've got about 1 meter's worth there. Apply the render. Now you can use whatever straight edges you used. For the scratch coat I just use a derby, but I also like to use this. This is a feather edge. This has a slight chamfer in the front there, as you can see. So what you want to do is hold in the back of it. We're going to start with this side, chamfer out. What you're going to do is rule off. Now what you want to do is try and get the wall as flat as possible. Tuck off the initial thickness from the render. Now we're going to scoop it back in the bucket. Now once you've got the horizontal, you also need to do a vertical. So we're going to go both ways with this. And then we're going to come back. Now this is going to give us the thickness, and this is going to enable us to get the wall flat. If you only go one way, it's not going to be flat both, so you need to do vertically and horizontally to make sure you've got a truly flat wall. Now word of warning, this is probably the hardest part to ruling. It's probably the hardest skill you learn because you're literally trying to get something flat with a straight edge of metal or timber, whatever you decide to use. So don't be disheartened if you struggle with this. It's going to take time to get used to, which is why I recommend you get used to straightening your scratch coat. It's going to give you practice and give you the ability to learn how to start getting it correctly. But that is what we're looking for. What you might do when you're ruling, you might find some low spots. So if you do, you're going to grab your render, fill in any spots that weren't ruled. Now this is going to happen. Maybe a bit there. And we give it one final rule. And you might have to do this a few times. Just notice one more bit. Now, you might be thinking of being pedantic, but the ruling stage is probably, in my opinion, the most important stage for getting a wall flat, because this is what's going to govern everything afterwards. This is going to set, and then we're going to further float it, which I'll show you in the rest of this video. But this is the really crucial part. Now once that's on, once it's flattened, you've got the whole wall done, you've got to leave it to dry. And then you leave it to dry until it's touch ready, but I'm going to go into that in about 2 minutes. Right, so we've got it to the point where the render's dried. Now what you want to be able to do is put your fingers in and it leaves an indentation. You don't want to be able to push it all the way in. Now if anything, this is a bit firm, but what we're going to do is close up the area. As you can see, it looks quite rough. There's a few lines where I've ruled off. What we need to do is close the area up and get ready for the finishing. So what we've got these. This is a float. Now this is a diamondback float from Rafina. I'll leave a link in the description. These, in my eyes, are the best floats you can buy. They're only about 12 quid. Like I said, I'll leave a link in the description, but these are the best ones you can buy. They break in fast, which means within only a few uses, it's ready to go. And they just leave a much better, smoother finish. So let's have a look what we've got to do. You put the float flat to the wall, and in circular motions, you rub it up. Now, this is too dry. Now, we have left it a little bit, to be fair, and got a bit of a wind coming in from the side. So that is a bit too dry. What you can do is spray it up. So we've got our hose, give it a little spray. What you find the great thing with this product is now that water's brought it right back. And what you should notice is that you get like a lively texture to it. So if you have a look, you can see. And then what our aim is here is to close up the pores, close up any gaps, and we're going to fill it up. So as you can see, we're left with like a nice slurry. So you do that. Now what you'll notice is a few little gaps. So say here, we've got a gap on the wall, put your render in, gap here, put your render in. So I'm using the same mix what I used to apply the render. Not wet it up, you want it to be quite stiff. You don't want it loose, you don't want it wet, because what you want to do when you're floating it, it wants to go into itself without creating too much moisture. So fill in the gaps, got a few little gaps there. And then what we do is just float it in place. Now what this will do, will fill in the gaps and fill in any holes. As you can see. Now that is how you start getting your wall flatter and flatter. Now I want to show you a tool to supercharge this. Now if you're going to be serious about rendering, you're going to take this maybe as a full-time job, maybe a DIY who's got a big house, you want to check this out. This is a Raffina power float. Basically a float, big blade, and it just circulates. Now watch, let me show you the difference what you get when you use this. This is a lot faster than using a standard float, and not only that, I find it compresses the render a lot more because you've got a lot of pressure from behind, got a bigger surface area on the float. It does the job fast, but I think it also does a better job at compressing the render. That's what the floating also does, it compresses the render into itself, so you've got a solid, more compact block of cement which enables it to set harder, and you've got a stronger product overall. So if you want to supercharge your results, use one of these. Okay, so we are nearly there. The wall is flat, it's floated, we've filled in any rivets, as so. And now we're aiming for this finish, that's a sponge finish. Got to finish it. Now this is a sponge. This is a sponge float, it's basically a thick sponge that sits on side a flat piece of plastic. Now I would usually have used a little jumbo car sponge, but this is so much better. Again, it's a Raffina product. I'm not endorsed by them, by the way. They just make brilliant rendering products, really good hand tools. But what we do is want to get the sponge damp. You don't need to soak in wet, you just want a bit of water at the beginning. Then what we're going to do is, again, holding the sponge flat to the surface, anti-clockwise motion, we're going to rub up the surface of the render. And you don't want to leave it too long. As soon as you've got a panel floated up, you want to do it pretty much straight away. And that way we've got moisture in the render, and that's going to allow the aggregate of the sand to sit on the surface. So we're just anti-clockwise motions, and you can be quite firm with these sponge floats because you've got bigger surface area. You can be quite firm with them, you don't have to be gentle. If you're using a normal car sponge, you have to be a bit more gentle on the hands, but with these you can really push and get the aggregate to the surface. So a general rule of thumb is with these, the harder and you push, the more pressure you put from the back, the more aggregate you're going to get on the front. Now this is your traditional sand cement finish that you're going to get. And this is the finish you get from the OCR product, as if it's the exact same as sand cement with render, but it's just 10 times easier. I'm not joking, this as a product is so much better than just average sand cement, and you get a guarantee. So we're just sponging that surface up, getting all the nice little sand molecules to the surface, And that's what closes up the pores and gives us that lovely, clean, sharp finish. And with these, you don't have to clean it off that often. If you do want to clean it, I just use a brush, get this sand out of there and keep it damp. Again, don't soak the sponge. That'll bring too much moisture to the render and it'll liven it up to the point where it's almost back to floating standards. We want to keep the render dry at this point, because all we're doing is we're bringing this sand so it sits on the surface, but we don't want to liven the render up. So again, bit of pressure, and then towards the end we just add, once you've got the whole area floated once, we're just going to give a gentle touch, give it that finishing touch, get rid of any little lines that are left behind, and that is it. That is your finish. Now there's 4 steps to getting a perfect finish in rendering, and this video on the left is going to show you the exact ways you can perfect your finish with ease. Click that to find the secrets now, and click the other side to subscribe to our channel. Cheers.